What you're about to hear isn't for the guy who still needs a standing ovation just to feel whole. It's definitely not for the man who calls codependency a feeling just so he doesn't have to call his weakness by its real name. Most men don't actually want to stop begging. They just want to learn how to beg with more aesthetic dignity. They want to stay desperate for a woman's choice, but with a deeper voice, a sterner face, and a cooler Instagram caption. Nothing changed. They just swapped the leash for a designer collar. And that is exactly why the man who no longer needs to be chosen becomes so dangerous. Not because he's a manipulator, not because he's abusive, not because he's some dark, edgy internet personality. He becomes dangerous because he has opted out of the approval economy. He stops asking for a grade, he stops competing for crumbs, and he stops accepting leftovers with the gratitude of an emotional refugee. And that scares people. But here's the part that many wounded egos love to ignore. In the wrong hands, this power is pure venom. When a man without character realizes he doesn't have to beg anymore, he risks confusing freedom with a license to inflict pain. A man like that hasn't evolved. He's just made his neediness more sophisticated. Picture the scene. She tests you, she goes cold, she ghosts, she reappears, measuring your interest the same way she's measured every other guy's. It's an old script, very effective against men who live and die by being accepted. But this time, she hits a wall. She finds someone who doesn't force the conversation, doesn't try to convince her, doesn't panic when the attention dips, and even worse for her ego, someone who seems perfectly fine even when he's not chosen. That's when the game breaks. No woman is truly rattled by a rejected man. A rejected man still orbits her. What truly dismantles her reality is the man who remains standing without the validation that would have crumbled anyone else. This man doesn't chase, he doesn't argue, he's not for sale. He observes, and silent observation always carries more weight than a frantic reaction. Let's lay the cards on the table. Real masculine power begins the day a man stops relying on female approval to prop up his identity. That's the cutoff point. That's where true frame is born. As long as you need to be chosen to feel valuable, you aren't leading, you aren't deciding, you're just negotiating your price in a public square and calling it connection. You're a slave to signals, replies, and chances. You're living in a state of emotional auction. It's pathetic, but it's the norm. But when that cycle breaks, when a man finally understands that his value cannot be hung on someone else's whims, the temperature changes. He becomes less predictable, less controllable, and unavailable for shallow games. He becomes dangerous, not out of cruelty, but out of independence. The problem is, many guys find this power and ruin it. They turn self-sufficiency into arrogance, standards into empty coldness, and clarity into a sick pleasure in hurting others. That's where most lose their way. The man who no longer needs to be chosen can become rare, respected and free, or he can just become another bitter guy in a nice suit, playing at superiority while still being a slave to how people react to him. This isn't about pickup artist nonsense. It's about internal structure. It's about what happens when a man finally steps off the validation treadmill. But to understand why this shakes up the room, we have to start with the ugliest truth of all. The average man lives his life asking for permission to exist. The average man doesn't live. He waits. He waits for the text, the like, the green light, the sign. He waits for that emotional crumb that he'll turn into destiny just to justify his own dependency with some cheap poetry. Does that hurt to hear? Good. It's supposed to. Because while he thinks he's being patient or loyal, what he's actually doing is panhandling for a personality. Nobody respects a man who outsources his existence to someone else's mood. Nobody. He wakes up and his first thought is her response. He goes to sleep measuring her absence. Every move he makes depends on an external reading. If she replies, he breathes. If she's cold, he collapses. If she disappears, he goes into a state of emergency. as if his dignity has been kidnapped and is awaiting ransom. It's a sad show, and the worst part? Men call this intensity. No, my friend, that is servitude with the romantic vocabulary. The average man is always offering himself, always explaining, always trying to prove his worth to see if someone will finally pick him and authorize his self-esteem to function for another 24 hours. But here's the catch. When you need to be chosen that badly, you become too easy to read. And anything that is too easy to read is easy to manipulate. A woman senses it early. She sees it in the over-availability, the rush to please, the fear of losing space. And once she sees it, the spark is dead. The man who asks for permission to exist never enters a relationship as a presence. He enters as a candidate. He's on a permanent probation trying to convince her he deserves to stay. A man running an emotional campaign has no peace and no power. He only has needs. Look at this closely. As long as you need her choice to feel whole, you are an employee of her validation. And employees don't lead, they obey. That's why the day you stop needing to be chosen doesn't just change your behavior, it changes your value in the entire game. The day you stop needing to be chosen, something very quiet happens inside you. And no, it's not euphoria. It's not that now nobody can touch me fantasy. That's just the talk of a man still at war with his own insecurities. The real change is colder, cleaner. You simply stop selling yourself. It sounds like a small thing, but it dismantles a lifetime of weak behavior. Up until then, you walked into every room wanting to be accepted. You adjusted your tone, your timing, your energy. You even edited your own truth just to look desirable. You were a walking emotional resume. Very hardworking, very sad. But then, the theater dies. When you no longer need her choice to validate who you are, you stop competing for attention. You stop chasing certainty. You stop turning her silence into a death sentence for your self-worth. You observe more. You react less. You speak less. And curiously, you carry more weight because need is always loud. A whole man isn't. He doesn't enter a room to prove. He enters to see. It's the difference between the guy coming in to be interviewed and the guy coming in to see if the position is even worth his time. You don't become too cold, you become expensive. And expensive things don't go on a clearance sale just because someone showed lukewarm interest. You don't panic at the thought of losing her because you no longer see rejection as a certificate of insufficiency. You see it as data that changes your posture, your eyes, your patience. Nothing is begging. And that's where the dynamic gets messy for people who are used to men who fall apart at the slightest hint of distance. When you stop needing to be chosen, you step out of the line. And when you step out of the line, you're no longer a candidate. You're a problem for any ego that's used to being the selection committee. The ego feeds on predictability. It loves the man who reacts on cue, who feels at the expected intensity, and who crawls back at the expected time. That's comfortable. She tests, she measures, she goes cold, and the reading is done. But when she hits a man who doesn't need to be chosen, the machine breaks. And when the machine breaks, the ego gets irritated. Not because she's a villain, but because she lost her tools. She lost the button. She lost the thermometer. She lost that silent certainty that one specific move could reorganize your entire emotional state. Now, you don't force intimacy. You don't treat a maybe like a prize. And that is destabilizing. Not because of what you're doing, but because of what you stopped doing. A woman used to needy men drives needy like an automatic car. Accelerate here, brake there, total control. But in front of a whole man, the steering wheel locks. He doesn't respond with hunger. He doesn't melt for the bare minimum. And that's when her ego starts to trip. The discomfort isn't about being ignored. It's about not knowing how much influence she actually has. No ego likes to discover. Its presence doesn't move the needle like it used to. It creates doubt. It creates curiosity. It creates friction. Because a rejected man can still be read. A self-sufficient man cannot. and anything that escapes being read weighs heavy on the mind. But then comes the next level. When you stop needing to be chosen, you don't just become hard to impress, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability, my friend, is always scarier than direct rejection. A man who needs always follows a pattern. He replies too fast, he catches feelings too early, he forgives too easily, and he thanks you for the bare minimum as if it were a fortune. He's simple to lead. But the man who doesn't need to be chosen breaks that logic without saying a word. He doesn't rush to fill the silence. He doesn't treat her ghosting like a 911 call. Unpredictability carries weight. It dismantles the comfort of those who always knew exactly which string to pull to get a reaction. Now she doesn't know if you're going to stay, leave, watch, or just lose interest without a second thought. And people who can't be pre-read mess with anyone used to operating on certainty. A predictable man isn't a threat. He's a service. You know how to activate him, how to calm him, how to reheat him. But the unpredictable man doesn't offer that luxury. He doesn't panic when the door closes. He doesn't beg. Sometimes he just leaves. And that sometimes is what eats at people. Dependency creates a routine. Self-sufficiency creates variation. But here is where the try-hard guys get it wrong. They discover this weight and start acting mysterious. They play at being cold. They do choreographed silence like they're practicing for a bad movie. It's ridiculous. Because real unpredictability isn't a performance. It's freedom. It's not needing to react to maintain your value. That's where most guys get lost. They confuse self-sufficiency with arrogance and frame with acting like a jerk. And this is where many evolutions die in the cradle. A man finally learns not to beg, not to chase. And then he ruins it by becoming a character. He becomes too dry, too artificial. He swaps his old neediness for theatrical arrogance and thinks he's matured. He hasn't. He's just become an insufferable guy with a better vocabulary. Real self-sufficiency doesn't need to pose as superior. It just isn't for sale. Arrogance, on the other hand, needs to be seen. It needs to be noticed. It needs to be admired in its role as the unreachable man. It's still dependent. It just changed the type of audience it wants. The arrogant man is still asking for validation, just through contrast. Before he begged for acceptance, now he wants to be feared or desired from a distance. He's still outsourcing his value. He still needs the outside gaze to feel like a somebody. And women see through that too. They see the calculated coldness, the practiced indifference. It's almost cute, but it doesn't command respect. It just creates a shallow discomfort. The truly self-sufficient man doesn't treat people with contempt just to prove he doesn't need them. He doesn't need to turn his boundaries into a show. He doesn't need to punish. He doesn't need to walk around with that wounded king energy. That's just trauma in a suit. Emotional independence isn't about being inaccessible to everyone. It's about not being too accessible to just anyone. One is about standards, the other is about pride, and pride is just fragility in expensive armor. That's why the strong man stays calm, stays lucid, and stays capable of connection. He just doesn't crawl, he doesn't negotiate his worth, and when he hits that sweet spot, what makes him dangerous isn't coldness. It's something much more serious. Clarity. Coldness scares emotional teenagers. Clarity scares people who are used to operating in the dark. That's the difference. The truly dangerous man isn't the one with the stone face and the enigma act. Any guy with a bruised ego can learn that in 2 weeks. The truly dangerous man is the one who sees. He looks at the situation and he understands the test. He understands the convenience. He sees when interest is shallow, when the approach is born of boredom, and when the affection is just someone looking for a +1 to their own narcissism. And worst of all, for those who were comfortable with his old naivety, he no longer argues with what he sees. He just adjusts the access level. He changes the distance. He removes his presence. No scandal, no lecture, no childish need to be recognized as a victim. Coldness can be interpreted as hurt or a defense. Clarity cannot. Clarity disarms people because it doesn't overreact. It simply refuses to be confused anymore. And when a man can no longer be easily confused, half of the games lose their purpose. Emotional games depend on fog. They depend on guilt, on ambiguity, on people who accept crumbs because they don't want to face what they're actually seeing. But this man doesn't accept them. He doesn't call disrespect a rough patch. He doesn't call convenience a connection. He sees the dynamic for what it is, raw, and that is what makes him dangerous. Not because he hurts people, but because he stops collaborating with the lie. And when you stop collaborating with the lie, people get upset, not with your change, but with the loss of the benefit they had. When a man no longer needs you, or your validation, or your choice to sustain his center, the game is over. He has left the board. This is what scares people most. When he doesn't need you, the game doesn't just weaken, it ends. Every game requires two things: an interest in staying and a fear of losing. When a man needs to be chosen, he brings both. He stays available, trying to get it right, trying to decode the signals. He plays because he still believes her decision defines him. But when that dies, the fuel is gone. There's no more race, no more urgency, no more silent hunger that turns every small gesture from her into a grand event. And without that hunger, the control vanishes. The man who doesn't need you isn't cruel. He is free, and freedom is unbearable for any relationship that only worked because one side was kept in a state of managed neediness. Before, all she had to do was go cold and you'd run. All she had to do was disappear and your world would shake. Now he might like you, he might want you, he might even choose to stay, but need you? No. And that's what implodes the old logic. A man who can stay or leave without losing himself can no longer be driven by fear. And a man without fear of not being chosen is no longer a piece on the board. He is a sovereign presence. He doesn't campaign for space. He doesn't prove he deserves a spot. He doesn't trade his identity for intermittent affection. This ends the utility of the tests and the games. The answer is now too simple. He isn't hooked. And when that realization hits, the game loses its flavor for those who lived on it. But there is one final cut, because a man can learn all this, step off the board, and still be corrupted if he starts using that freedom to play with those who are still lost. That's why this isn't about strength, it's about character. This is where the real man separates himself from the bitter guy with a haircut. Learning to not need to be chosen is liberating, but in the wrong hands, it's a dirty weapon. The guy stops begging, and instead of maturing, he starts savoring his ability to confuse, punish, and play with someone else's neediness. Very elegant on the outside, very rotten on the inside. That's not strength, that's disciplined resentment. And disciplined resentment is still weakness. It's just trained. The strong man doesn't use his clarity to humiliate. He doesn't use his freedom to collect broken people like trophies. That would just be the same old need to be seen, just wearing a more expensive outfit. Look at this clearly. If you discover you don't need anyone's choice, and you use that to feed your ego or trigger someone's insecurity just to prove you can, then you're still a prisoner. You're a prisoner to their reaction, a prisoner to the effect you cause, a prisoner to the sick pleasure of being important through someone else's pain. You're still dependent. You're still small. You're still making that person the center of your narrative even while you pretend you've moved on. The difference is that before you begged for love, now you beg for power. It's the same poverty, just with a superiority scent. Most men lose themselves here because they confuse freedom with license. It isn't. Not needing to be chosen doesn't give you the right to become an instrument of emotional destruction. It gives you responsibility. It gives you standards. It gives you the silent obligation not to repeat to others what once made you feel small. The strong man doesn't play with hearts to heal his own pride. He just no longer offers himself as a sacrifice to maintain the peace of those who never respected him. That's the difference. One thing is leaving the game. Another is trying to become the casino. And the man who becomes the casino still attracts chaos. He just thinks it looks cool now. But we're still missing the highest conclusion. The peak isn't not needing to be chosen. The peak is knowing what to do with that freedom without losing your soul. In the end, the ultimate win isn't making someone chase you. That's still dependency wearing victory makeup. The peak is different. It's when a man finally chooses himself without turning it into a slogan, without announcing it to an audience, and without needing to prove it to anyone. It sounds simple. It's not. Choosing yourself requires cutting the oldest addiction of all, the addiction to measuring yourself by someone else's decision. As long as you still need someone to stay to validate your worth, you haven't chosen yourself. You're just managing yourself until the next hit of approval. That's not freedom. That's just a break between relapses. The man who doesn't need to be chosen isn't at war with women, or relationships, or affection, or the world. He just has standards. He doesn't run from connection. He just refuses to lay down on the altar of acceptance. He doesn't sell himself for attention. He doesn't fall apart over silence. He's not in a race to prove he belongs. He already belongs to himself. Whoever enters his life enters because he chooses them too, and that changes everything. Now, he doesn't love out of hunger. He loves out of consciousness. He doesn't stay out of fear. He stays out of coherence. He doesn't leave out of spite. He leaves because of boundaries. This man isn't dangerous because he rejects. He's dangerous because he discerns. Because he isn't impressed by the bare minimum. Because he no longer confuses intensity with value. Because he knows exactly how much his peace costs. And he stopped giving discounts to people who want to pay in emotional crumbs. That is why he is rare. The average man wants to be desired by everyone. The strong man wants to be worthy of himself, even if it costs him a few closed doors. And closed doors were never the problem. The problem was always the number of men who would kneel in front of them instead of building another way out. When you choose yourself, that scene dies. The campaign dies. The hunger dies. The beautiful desperation that so many people call love, because they aren't brave enough to call it dependency, dies. And in its place is born the only kind of power that doesn't rot, the power to remain whole, even when nobody chooses you. That is why this man is intimidating. That is why he carries weight. That is why he interrupts toxic dynamics without having to raise his voice. Because the moment he truly chooses himself, the world can no longer blackmail him with absence, rejection, or crumbs. A man who can no longer be emotionally blackmailed doesn't become a legend. He becomes peace. In the end, the man who no longer needs to be chosen didn't win because he learned to be cold. He won because he stopped asking for permission to exist. And that changes everything. It changes the look in his eyes, his timing, his presence. It even changes his silence. He doesn't walk into a room with his hat in his hand, hoping someone will approve of him so he can finally feel worthy. That phase is over. The average man begs for space. The wounded man demands attention. The strong man chooses where he steps, and more importantly, where he refuses to lower himself. That's the danger. Not the act, not the pose. The danger is the fact that he can no longer be bought with crumbs, kept with doubt, or controlled by absence. When a man escapes that level of dependency, the structures around him collapse. But your big victory isn't in seeing anyone else rattled. It's in finally not needing anyone else's reaction to sustain your peace. Because if you still need to make an impact to feel powerful, you're still a prisoner to the outside gaze. You just change the shape of the chain. Remember this, the man who no longer needs to be chosen doesn't become dangerous because he rejects the world. He becomes dangerous because he chose himself, without the show, without the apology, and without the negotiation. Comment below, I don't beg to be chosen.